Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us here at Space Florida for the Road to Artemis. As you can see, we've got a spectacular panel that's ready to go. This is the inaugural event of the Thunderbird Initiative for Space Leadership, Policy, and Business. Welcome again, and thank you very much. We're going to hear a couple of comments briefly from the Dean and Director General, Dr. Sanjeev Kagram of Thunderbird. Then we'll also hear from Professor Jim Bell of ASU Interplanetary Initiative. I am Zahir Ali. I'm Professor of Practice, along with Professor Greg Autry at Thunderbird School for Global Management. It is our pleasure to bring this to you on the eve of our return to the moon. Artemis represents the best of so much. It is a bipartisan program that is returning America to deep space and opens the door for the future of humanity beyond the world to the moon and eventually beyond that. So thank you very much. And without further ado, I'll welcome Dean Kagram. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Zahir. Thank you to the incredible team, yourself, Professor Autry, our incredible team at Thunderbird across ASU, for assembling this all-star cast on the eve of Artemis. It is truly inspirational and transformative. We want to thank our external partners as well, Space Florida, Redwire, Boeing, and many others. Just a little bit about the Thunderbird School. We were founded 76 years ago. It's a historic institution founded by Thunderbird Air Force pilots who came back from World War II and, having seen the horrors of that war, founded a school based on the premise that borders frequented by trade and diplomacy seldom need soldiers. Over the years, that wonderful motto and frame got encapsulated in a single word, borderless, and nothing could be more borderless than space. Our vision is a world of sustainable and equitable prosperity and peace. Our mission is to educate, empower, and influence global leaders and managers who are maximizing the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution and minimizing its downsides. As you all know, the fourth industrial revolution is a transformative epoch that we're in right now: technological, economic, social, political, cultural, in every way, institutional, 12 key technology sets, and nothing could be more emblematic of the fourth industrial revolution. And we know that now, no more than ever before, do we need tremendous new set of global leaders and managers to bring the world together, to take us to places we have never gone before. And again, space represents one of those next and perhaps final frontiers. 2 years ago, we launched the Thunderbird Initiative on Global Space Initiative for Leadership, Business, Policy. Our goal was, with our incredible partners at ASU, to bring a brand new set of educational programs. We launched the world's first ever graduate program in space leadership, policy, and business this past year. We've launched executive programs around the world, and to advance our knowledge through thought leadership and applied research. In just 2 years, we've gone to greater heights, and I want to thank again Professor Ali, Professor Autry for his leadership. This is all in deep collaboration with our partners across ASU, and you're going to hear from one of our great leaders, Jim Bell, today, of New Space, Milo, and many other areas of our work at ASU, Arizona State University. Lindy Elkins-Tannen and Interplanetary Initiative, our incredible faculty at the School of Space Exploration. ASU, Arizona State University, under Michael Crow, President Michael Crow, has been ranked #1 for innovation 7 years running. And nowhere does this more emblematic than in our work in space. Thunderbird is proud to be part of the ASU enterprise as the #1 school for global leadership management and advancing this tremendous new space leadership policy and business initiative. So I want to thank again our speakers for their being truly global leaders in the fourth industrial revolution and joining us. And we're so excited and anticipate with great inspiration, hope, and belief that space will advance sustainable and equitable prosperity worldwide. Back to you, Professor Ali, and thank you to Jim Bell for his leadership at ASU, our incredible partners again, and our speakers.
Thank you, Dean Kagram. Very much appreciated your impressive remarks. Do we have Professor Bell queued up?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Wonderful. And Professor Bell is our eyes on Mars, if for those who don't know. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Z and Greg and Sanjeev, and good sort of T-minus 18 hours or so everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to this, Arizona State University and Thunderbird School of Global Management sponsored event. I'm Jim Bell. I'm a professor in ASU's School of Earth and Space Exploration, and I'm the director of ASU's New Space Initiative. It's a program that connects faculty, students, and staff with the commercial space sector up and down the supply chain. Now, of course, we're here to learn and celebrate the launch of a new U.S. government rocket, of course, but as most of you know, commercial aerospace companies, big and small, have been important partners in the design, the development, testing, and now the launch of the Artemis One mission. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that in today's great panel discussion. But I would be remiss in not mentioning that we're also super excited about Artemis One here at ASU because of the 10 secondary lunar and space science payloads that are being launched, deployed, and carried to the moon and other deep space destinations by the mission. ASU leads one of them called LunaMap, which is the first CubeSat science mission competitively selected about 7 years ago by NASA's Science Mission Directorate. LunaMap is a small 6U CubeSat orbiter that's designed to map buried ice deposits around the lunar South Pole at unprecedented resolution. The LunaMap team is led by ASU Professor Craig Hardgrove, and the team is already hard at work here in Tempe preparing to make our first DSN contact with the spacecraft just a few hours after launch tomorrow morning. That's why a lot of the team isn't down there at the Cape, because they've got a job to do very shortly after launch. I'm Craig's deputy principal investigator on the mission, and I can tell you there is a lot of anticipation and excitement among the students and staff here on campus at ASU about the launch and about the mission. So welcome again. I'm going to turn it back over to Z and Greg to what promises to be a lively, fascinating, and educational panel discussion about SLS, Orion, and the Artemis One mission. Back to you guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Folks, and thank you also to our sponsors, Space Florida, Boeing, ASU New Space, and Redwire. As Dean Cogram alluded to, Greg and I, along with our leadership at Thunderbird and ASU, have created the initiative for space leadership policy and business out of Thunderbird. There are flyers, etc., on your seats. Please go ahead and take a look. We're going to be focused with that initiative on academic research and management around the topics of how the space domain is going to evolve. But we're also going to be creating events like this to bring together industry, academia, investors, et cetera. And finally, also working with the startup ecosystem to make sure that the pipeline continues to be strong, to make sure that entrepreneurs get over the valley of death and get to, get on orbit and beyond. So without further ado, we're running a little late, so I'm going to shorten some of these intros a little bit. I expect this panel doesn't need a ton of introduction. I think everybody here knows who they are. But very briefly, General Charles Bolden was our 12th administrator of NASA, only the second astronaut to hold that position. And there, Administrator Bolden oversaw the transition from the space shuttle to a new era of exploration, with a great focus on the ISS and aeronautics technology development. Before that, General Bolden is also a distinguished veteran, flying combat missions in Vietnam, with a test pilot and a commanding general of the Marine Expeditionary Force attached to Operation Desert Thunder. He is also remaining engaged with the Charles F. Bolden Group, but he keeps trying to retire, is what I've heard. Although, as far as I can tell, none of us want to let him. No. Next to him, we've got former representative and the 13th administrator of NASA, Jim Bridenstine, who oversaw the formation of the Artemis program, and that's as global as it gets, folks, bringing the world with us to the moon, as we go. Also oversaw the return of Americans to space on American rockets from American soil. He expanded the commercial and international partnerships in space. And is actually the first elected official to be appointed administrator. Before that, he was also a pilot, a naval aviator, flying Hawkeyes and combat missions as well in Iraq and Afghanistan before serving. Next to him is Dr. Bhavya is the Associate Administrator for Technology Policy and Strategy within the Office of the NASA Administrator. She provides executive leadership in the newly created Office of Technology, Policy and Strategy within the Office of the Administrator, and is the Acting Chief Technologist of NASA, the first woman to hold that position in NASA's 60-plus year history. She also served as a member of the Presidential Transition and Review Teams for both NASA and DoD, and for 15 years before that, she led strategy, tech assessment, policy studies, and analyses at the Institute for Defense Analysis and Science and Technology Policy. Online, do we have Professor Pace online yet?
Yep, I'm here.
If we could bring you in. There you are, sir, and he is ready to go at mission control.
The trick is, how do you know this is the old mission control?
Professor Pace is director of the George Washington Space Policy Institute, former executive secretary of the National Space Council at Elliott School of International Affairs. He previously served as a deputy assistant to the president and executive secretary of the National Space Council. Also served as the associate administrator for program analysis and evaluation as deputy chief of staff for the NASA administrator. He was the assistant director for space and aeronautics in the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy. Before that, he worked for RAND Corporation and their Policy Institute as deputy director as well. Then back to the table, we've got Mike Gold, who is executive vice president for civil space and external affairs at Redwire. Previously, Mike was a senior advisor to the NASA administrator for legal and international affairs, acting associate admin for Office of International and Interagency Relations, and AA also for space policy and partnerships. Fundamentally, during his tenure, Mike led the development and implementation of the Artemis Accords. So all those 22 countries have him to thank or blame, perhaps, depending on how it goes.
Only 21 so far.
21,
I hope it's
sorry.
22 soon.
22 soon. Sorry, I shouldn't slip of the tongue. I apologize. I'll stop
Be
there.
a reality soon enough.
That's right. That's right. Mike was also chair of the Commercial Space Transport Advisory Committee for 7 years and was also chair of the NASA Advisory Council's Regulatory Policy Committee. Before joining NASA, Mike has worked across aerospace at Maxar, Bigelow, and also worked in law practice himself. Next to him, we've got Gabe Shervin, who served as the chief of staff at NASA during the launch of the Artemis program, where he actively managed NASA's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and earned the agency's Distinguished Service Medal. You know, we kept flying Sophia during that, thanks to a lot of the work that you and your teams put in, so we appreciate that. Prior to that, he worked in the U.S. House of Representatives as district director for then Congressman Jim Bridenstine. And last, but certainly not least, I've got the creator of Thunderbird's space program and my esteemed colleague, Professor Dr. Greg Autry. He's clinical professor and director of the Thunderbird Institute for Space Leadership, Policy, and Business at ASU, served on the NASA agency review team as the White House liaison before being nominated by President Trump to serve as NASA CFO. He's also a visiting professor at the Institute for Security, Science, and Technology at Imperial College and is globally recognized as the leading academic expert on the business of commercial space. Some of us call him the space prophet because he was out there on the ramp in the early 2000s telling us this all was going to happen. Not everybody listened to him, but the smart ones did. And at this point, I'd like to turn over the mic to him to get going with the panel.
All right, thank you. Could I have the iPad as well? The iPad.
You didn't need the mic.
Yeah, I got the mic. All right. Well, thank you so much here, and I'm just totally honored to be here with this great panel of people that I respect and love so much, and I'm so excited to be here on this day. Way back in December of 2016, I remember walking into NASA and meeting with Charlie and Deb at that time as part of the agency review team. And you know, one of the things we were thinking about is we've got this incredible rocket and deep space capsule, and we wanted a more aggressive mission for it. And you know, at that time we began thinking, you know, we want to return to the moon. When I was a kid, I was 6 years old, and I watched Buzz and Neil, you know, walk on the moon, and you know, that inspired me. But we sent you know, a little more than a dozen folks there, all test pilots and one scientist, I believe. It's going to be different this time. This time, everybody's coming, right? And so I'm so excited about, we made a commitment at that time to include a woman in the return to the moon, and I'm excited the new administration has expanded that to woman and person of color. But just as importantly, we're bringing commercial companies, we're bringing a wide variety of international partners, and this panel says so much about that. So with no further ado, I'd like each of the panelists just to give us their thoughts about the importance of what's going to hopefully happen tomorrow morning, and how we got here, and then we'll dig into some questions from me and the audience. So, Charlie?
I'm a test pilot, so the importance is that we get through
I didn't
this.
mean to diss
No.
test pilots.
I have very simple reason that it's important. It's it's like any time you first fly a vehicle that's not been flown before, it's got to prove itself. And so for me as a test pilot, I'm really excited to see the vehicle go through its paces. Orion has been through this in 2014 in a different form. It was kind of a scaled down Orion, but most people have forgotten that we flew Orion in 2014 very successfully. It had three purposes. One was to make sure that we could talk to it all the time. The other one was to make sure that it could control itself, and the third thing was to make sure that it could safely get back home with the heat shield. And it did that, and it came through with flying colors. And so I'm really, really, really excited to see what's going to happen now that we have SLS added to the team. But also the big question mark, Jim worked us through it, is the service module. We took a big risk in adding the European service module and putting it in the critical path, because that meant if they didn't perform, we didn't perform. So there are all kinds of good things about tomorrow why I'm really excited. I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Charlie. Jim?
Yeah, so a lot of thoughts, but I think the symbolism that comes from this being an international launch on day one, I think, is important. The European Space Agency has been a great partner on the International Space Station. Now they're going to be a great partner on our way to the moon. Well, we have to remember this is really the first flight in a lot of flights that are going to build infrastructure for continuous access to the moon. So we're going to the moon sustainably. So the international partners, all of that is very important for sustainability, but also having the infrastructure that is open architecture so that the way we do data and communications and avionics and environmental control and life support systems, all of these things, when we think about the gateway and having access to any part of the moon and the infrastructure on the surface of the moon with power, there's a lot that is going to be done here that will be an enabler for all kinds of activities in the future. And really tomorrow's flight is the beginning of all of that starting. So it's a pretty exciting time. And I remember when I first got nominated to be the NASA administrator, Charlie said, we met together and he said, everything that happens on your watch, take credit for. And I said, okay, gladly. I'm a politician. That's what we do. And he said, look, I took credit for the things that happen on my watch, and whoever comes after you will take credit for the things that happen on their watch. The important thing is this not only is a symbol of international diplomacy and commercial partners, but it's apolitical, bipartisan capability. It gives America hope that we can all work together and achieve astonishing things when, in fact, we can get past all of the rancor and just focus on inspiration and capability. So I think there's a lot of great symbolism that's going to happen tomorrow, and I'm very much looking forward to it.
Bhavya?
Thank you, Jim. I am so excited I can barely sit still. We're 18 hours away from 8:33 a.m., 18-plus-ish hours, and yeah, it's going to be so incredibly exciting. Actually, driving over from the hotel I was at, there was a Dunkin' Donuts sign. They're going to have a one-day-only donut called Artemis Moon Donuts. So
cool.
So I think the whole...
They're not one of our sponsors. So.
Oh, no. I love donuts. So I'm just really excited about all of this what we are starting now. I think I was at this press conference yesterday, and I think one of the things I said was, this is the start of not this sprint, but a marathon that, will go, to the moon, to Mars, beyond the solar system, and that's what I'm most excited about. It's, we are at this historic inflection point, and it's all go from here. Go Artemis.
So Dunkin' may not be a sponsor, but I'm awake right now because of Dunkin' Donuts, so I would.
All right, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, America runs on Dunkin'. So, Greg, I just want to thank you and Thunderbird and Redwire and Boeing for sponsoring this. But I want to thank everyone on this panel, and even larger, everyone in this room for getting us here to this singular moment. I just want to pause for a second to appreciate how unique it is and how the family got us here. Republicans, Democrats, military, civilian, state, NASA, commerce, Red Sox, Orioles fans. We all came together to make this moment happen. And this has not happened before, at least in my lifetime. I know I look really young, right? But I wasn't even alive for Apollo. Wasn't alive for Apollo.
I was.
Bhavya was, and she looks younger than me, believe me. So, but I actually wasn't, never got to see it. And unfortunately, America has not successfully mounted and sustained a beyond LEO human spaceflight effort since then. And you heard from the pilots and engineer, I'm the recovering attorney, and I believe the reasons for that is largely politics. And that's why it's so amazing to see Artemis come together, not as a Republican program, not as a Democratic program, but as an American program, as the world's program. And thanks to all of these people in the room, that's how we got to where we are. And I don't want to do any disservice to engineers, but that's the difficulty and why I like seeing, again, like Jim and other politicians participate, because there's no rocket equation for Congress. I think that's what's
Only I can call myself a politician. You can't do that.
You have to call him an engineer.
a pilot and a uniter, Jim, shall we say.
Okay. Gabe.
And so
I'm sorry.
that was particularly important in terms of how we got here, the bipartisan aspect of Artemis, and then, as you've heard, also the international aspect of the program. If you contrast what's happened beyond LEO to low Earth orbit, where we've had the International Space Station operating for over 20 years with dozens, hundreds of countries involved in experiments, it has been the crown jewel of global human spaceflight, has been sustainable, and a big part of that is that international aspect. And the ISS deserves a Nobel Peace Prize for what it's done. And with Artemis, we've woven that international aspect into the DNA of the program as manifested by the Artemis Accords, which now have 21, I hope 22 soon. And it's that diversity, the innovation that comes from the different points of view where we can make Artemis not just an American program, but the world's program, humanity's program, to go back to the moon so that everyone can share in the incredible new science and awe and wonder that we'll get out of the program. And then, of course, I can't finish without mentioning norms of behavior and how important that is to the Artemis Accords and the Artemis journey, because we need to ensure that when we go to space, we do better as a spacefaring nation than we have here on Earth, that we avoid debris, we avoid harmful interference, we fully, freely, and openly share scientific information. These are the values and virtues of the Accords, and it's important that we not just take our astronauts, but we take our values of freedom, of peace to the moon. The journey of the Artemis program is to the moon and Mars, but the destination of the Accords can be peace and prosperity. Go Artemis. Looking forward to tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you. Gabe.
Thanks for that, Mike. I get to follow that up. I always wonder when I sit next to Mike, like, how is he going to weave the Red Sox in today? So 30 seconds in, we got the Red Sox. So that was really good. But I think the big thing that tomorrow represents to me, it's about inspiration. I think my time at the agency, I got to tour every single center. I got to spend time with almost every program and every mission directorate and all the functional offices. And I got to hear the stories. How did you end up here? I'm always interested in somebody's story. Like, how did you end up here today? And so many of them tied it right back to Apollo. And whether they saw it personally, whether they were influenced by their parents, their grandparents, like Apollo had this overwhelming effect on the future of so many people and the career choices of so many people. And I think Artemis has the opportunity to do the same. Like, I have two young girls. They're 14 and 16. They're amazing. They're brilliant. I'm biased, but they're brilliant. And man, when I get a chance, when we decided Artemis was going to be the name of this program, as a dad of two girls, to be able to speak to them about what that meant for them and how the opportunities for young girls should just explode off of Artemis should be just, like that was a very humbling and inspirational moment for me as a dad, to see us be able to come together as an agency, like Mike said, internationally, politically, in a lot of different ways, to support a program that's going to open the doors for so many groups that might have missed these opportunities in the past. And so to me, Artemis is about inspiration and motivation. And I can't wait till people walk around the agency and they ask, what got you here? And they listen to the story and it comes back to Artemis. Artemis got me here. Because I think we have those types of opportunities ahead of us.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Scott, you get the burden of thinking of something new to say.
I'm an academic. I can think of something to say, whether it's new or not is another matter. I really liked what, of course, what Mike Gold said about why we're sort of doing this sort of thing. Let me sort of put on an academic hat and step back a bit and look at this from a larger historical perspective. I mean, first of all, the world today is very different than the world of Apollo. You've all heard me on talking about the democratization, globalization of space. It's a very different environment than the Cold War race. We're doing this for different purposes. And so Space Policy Directive 1, talking about partnerships with commercial and international people, is in large part a response to change global circumstances that we find ourselves in today, which is why we're doing the Artemis Accords, why we have international participation in this mission. I'll point out that this is not the first time Europe has been in the critical path. The launch of the Ariane was in the critical path of James Webb, and ESA did a magnificent job with that. And we're looking forward, obviously, to more achievements from our international partners. This is also not the first time we've done a very all-up, complex, challenging first flight of an untried vehicle. People should remember that in 1981 was STS-1, the very first flight of the space shuttle, which, by the way, was manned, was an all-up test, probably called the most audacious test flight in history. This is not manned, which is probably smart, but it is also an incredibly complex mission to go out to the moon, operate around. This is not one and done just today and this week. This is going to be a relatively long mission and a very, very challenging one to do it. And the people have mentioned the test flight aspects of this as being important. Not only is the test data itself important for this mission, but also it's about training entire organizations how to fly in space once again, which we haven't done beyond low Earth orbit since 1972 with humans. And so it's not just our astronauts who fly in space, not just our hardware, but we have entire institutions on the ground that have to be organized, trained, and equipped to learn how to do this. And we have many more people now sort of involved in it. But the most important outcome, I think, of this upcoming flight, one, hopefully, is the success of the flight and the data we get, but it's also the people who are going to be affected by operating and running this mission, really over the next month. I should also point out that the idea of going back to the moon and onto Mars is not new. I saw that my predecessor, John Logston, was there in the audience, and that's terrific. He's emeritus, so he has time to go down there. My semester is starting this week. And of course, he was there at the Apollo launches. And he and I both went through the periods of the Space Exploration Initiative, the Vision for Space Exploration, Artemis, hopefully third time the charm. And I think the reason why Artemis is going to be successful is lessons we took over the previous decade of starts and stops to our directions. What is it that makes space policy sustainable over a long period? Not just technically, not just economically, but politically sustainable over a long period of time. Several people have mentioned the importance of bipartisan support, utterly crucial. Without it, you don't go anywhere. But what also makes things sustainable is not just an inspiring vision, but a vision and direction that aligns with enduring national interests, so that new political leadership, new Congresses, new presidents can and pick up the baton and carry on, because doing so is in the nation's long-term national interest, economically, security-wise, diplomatically, and so forth. And so I think the great thing about Artemis and what we've come to is in this new world, globalized and democratized and new players, we have a direction and a campaign, a vector, which is aligned with long-term U.S. interests and those of our key friends and allies. And I think that's the reason, in addition to technical success, that we will have sustainable access to the moon and onward to Mars. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Scott. I'll tell you what my solution was, because my students, most of them are in a classroom right now, and they're either reviewing remote or they're here. I made it an assignment. So how many of my students are in the room, former or current? There we go. Thank you. I'd like to start out the first question, which is, I think, something that always overhangs in any big national program like this. But, you know, this cost a lot of money, and it's taken a long time, like James Webb Space Telescope and many other programs. I'd like to hear from the panel why this is worth it for the American taxpayers who are funding this, and also, you know, what does this mean for everybody else on the planet who is kind of a stakeholder in these programs sometimes, whether it was their choice or not. So just real quick down the panel, Charlie, what are your thoughts on why the taxpayer cares?
I don't think the taxpayer does care, to be quite honest, and I think that's one of the difficulties of putting on a program like this, and it's because people like me are not very good storytellers. You know, I'm an engineer. Well, I'm not, truly, but I play one. So we tend not to be very good storytellers, and taxpayers listen to stories, and particularly young taxpayers. And so I think one of the best things that ever happened to NASA was really revolutionizing its communications department, so that we brought in young people who understood social media, and we started things like NASA Socials, where people were brought in and asked to do one thing: take your experience and share it with your folk back home. If it was good, share it. If it was bad, share it. But when I was the administrator, I don't know what Jim did. I said, but first of all, come tell me why it wasn't a good experience. I don't think anybody is going to come here or go anywhere where you see a launch or an airplane launch or something like that it's not a good experience. But every once in a while we have a bad day. And so, you know, I think the biggest thing is to inform the public so that they can appreciate the fact that people now have fresh drinking water in parts of the world that didn't have that before because of the research that's going on the International Space Station. You know, I didn't have any problem with water on shuttle. We produced more than we could use. We dumped water each day, twice a day. You know, we don't have that on the International Space Station. So we're now at a point where we recycle about 98% of everything that's wet. Perspiration, pee, you name it. And but that technology is now used in places like, and I'm from the South, so we have areas in South Carolina, Louisiana, where water purification systems are now there that didn't exist before. But because we have to do this. Looking at food, going distances like we are going to Mars, we're starting to produce food you know, in different kinds of ways. Meat that's 3D printed. So lots of good things that I think are really important, the value that's coming back to the taxpayer, but we've got to educate them on that.
All right, thank you. Jim, thoughts?
Yeah, you mentioned the James Webb Space Telescope, and obviously I had a lot of hearings explaining why that was costing so much and taking so long. But I will tell you, what has the James Webb Space Telescope done for the United States of America? It has now established us as the leader in physics for the next 50 years. I mean, it is a fundamental demonstration of the strength of this country that we live in. And I would say that the Artemis program is going to be a similar tool for that strength. We think back to the Apollo program. You know, there was a book written by Paul Spudis, who I know a lot of people in this room probably know or know of. And in the book, he described the importance of the Apollo program as it related to the Cold War. And he mentioned that there was a day when President Ronald Reagan announced a program, the Strategic Defense Initiative, and of course it was criticized. People said it couldn't possibly be funded, and certainly we weren't technologically capable to develop it, and obviously it was going to be tremendously expensive, and they called it the Star Wars program to make fun of it. Interestingly, the people who believed that we could in fact develop a missile defense shield were the Soviets, and they believed it because they saw the United States of America had 12 men walking on the moon. So part of demonstrating American strength is to do big projects that are technologically challenging and in some cases expensive. So I think there's a lot of goodness that the other thing is, we think about why do we go to the moon? Why do we go to Mars? I mean, there's so many reasons when you think about the science of it, but there are going to be major discoveries made. When you think about Mars specifically, we now know that it has complex organic compounds. Methane cycles match the seasons of Mars. We believe there's liquid water 12 kilometers under the surface of Mars. Because of Spirit and Opportunity, we know that Mars had an ocean in its northern hemisphere. It had a magnetosphere and a thick atmosphere. Bottom line is, when a discovery is made such as, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, but there's a chance that we could find life on Mars. We're talking about maybe single-celled organisms, basic life on Mars. If that discovery is made, we want that discovery made by the United States of America and our partners, not by competitors of ours and their partners. So I think these are all reasons to do big, audacious things like what we're about to do tomorrow. And what tomorrow is the beginning of a long journey that's going to have all kinds of implications that most of us in this room right now are probably not even thinking of, just like Apollo did.
Fantastic.
I yield.
Bhavya, first of all, I want to congratulate your team and the Biden administration for the increased NASA budgets that we've seen. That's something I was proud to have helped push along in the last administration, but it's good to see the increase. And I want to remind the public at home, we're talking about approximately $25 billion a year. And to put that in perspective, the cost overrun on the F-35, we're not talking about the planes themselves, just the overrun, is more than $180 billion. And the GAO identified fraud, waste, and abuse in Medicare, again, not the program, just the fraud, waste, and abuse, is over $80 billion, okay? So NASA's a fraction of some of these overruns and frauds and other programs. It is not a huge amount of your money going to these programs, but they deliver a lot. So anyway, what are your thoughts?
So the question is, are we
What is the value for the taxpayer?
Okay. First, can I fact check myself? The Artemis donut is Krispy Kreme, not Dunkin' Donuts.
We're expecting that check from Krispy Kreme.
Okay. So I want to, I mean, obviously I agreed with everything folks said, and actually Scott had already started to make the taxpayer argument. The framework I have is space exploration, human exploration in particular, has intrinsic value and instrumental value. Intrinsic value is things like, end in itself, are we alone? Is there life out there? Where did we come from? Where are we going? These are important questions that are important for taxpayers. And I think to Charlie's points, it behooves us as policymakers and leaders to help understand. So that's kind of the intrinsic value that I think a lot of us in the space community feel strongly about. But then there's this concept of instrumental value, or sort of be a means to other ends. And exploration has these additional spin-off, knock-off, whatever you want to call them. So the first is creating global alliances, projecting soft power, being a tool for global diplomacy. And you talked about it, Jim, Scott talked about it. A second is, and I think, Charlie, you mentioned that, motivating the young and the disadvantaged to take up STEM careers, the inspirational value. And the inspiration isn't just for, the young and the disadvantaged, it's inspiration for the world. It promotes U.S. leadership. Another one is sort of addressing societal challenges, and again, all of us talked about it, medical breakthroughs, finding solutions to challenges such as climate, job creation, economic development, equitable access to opportunities, developing a space industrial base for defense applications sort of across the board, right? And then one thing we need to remember is both instrumental and intrinsic values are important for us to communicate to the taxpayer. Not every citizen will be, motivated by intrinsic values. Not everybody may potentially care about, where did we come from, but they may really benefit from understanding the job creation opportunities, the high-paying jobs that come from the same sector. But on the other hand, I think we don't want to lean towards too much the instrumental value either, because, there's other areas, especially young people we are talking about, maybe, they may be motivated by other criteria. Climate change is a huge driver for a lot of young people, and, sort of idealism of, eradicating poverty from Earth. So I think there's a balance between communicating both the instrumental value of space and the intrinsic value of space. And that's kind of how I think about it.
Thank you. Mike?
I love going after Bhavya because then I can just copy her.
Okay, next.
Yeah. And all the talk of donuts is making me hungry. Let me begin with, of course, there's going to be amazing scientific discoveries from Artemis, as well as tremendous technological advantages. I'd like to point out we're here in a life sciences building where Redwire preps its biotech, its plant sciences, micrograv experiments. I firmly believe that the countries and companies that excel at microgravity, research, development, manufacturing will be the economic and national security leaders of the future, that we go to space not just to learn, but we will find new ways to heal the sick and to feed the hungry and to deal with the existential threats that we have with climate change and other issues. And that's all going to be tremendously important. But if I can move over to the more esoteric, I simply believe, and everyone in this panel in this room is an example of it, nothing unites us like space exploration does. As a country and as a people across the world, in a sense, space is nothing, but in another sense, space is what connects us all together. And it gives us hope for the future. And at a time where we've got the war in Russia and disease, et cetera, is there anything that can be more important than that hope? And space exploration tells us that there's going to be a tomorrow. It will be a better tomorrow, and we will be a better people as we get to tomorrow. And I just don't think there's anything more important than that, and you can't put a value on it.
Awesome. Gabe?
So, and speaking directly to the taxpayer, right? Like my parents, whenever I got a job at NASA, everybody thought that working at NASA is so cool.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to know what it is that we're doing, right? And so you get a chance to tell these stories over and over and over again. But I think one of the things that was really evident to me is people saw NASA doing incredible things, but they had a tough time seeing themselves inside of NASA's work, right? They were amazed at what NASA was doing, but tying it to how it was impacting their quality of life was always the challenge. And Charlie brought up a really good point earlier, you know, and not to knock on any engineers, because I'm probably surrounded by them in this room, so I don't want to upset anybody. But engineers, you guys love the development side and you love the engineering side. That's why people like me can come in and help you tell the story and help make sure that the story connects with the people that are actually the end users of a lot of that technology. And whenever you think about what Apollo did for the quality of life, for the technological developments, not only in the United States, but across the world, you see the same things, the same potential and possibilities inside of Artemis. And it really comes down to improving the lives of the taxpayer. That's what Artemis is going to do through the technology development, the exploration, what comes out of that, where we're able to go, the opportunities we're able to open up, and the technology that will be developed in this process that will come all the way back home to impacting people's lives on a daily basis, like you see in your cell phones and other things that we depend on. I have had a chance over the last 12 years to hear Jim Bridenstine give 8,000 speeches, right? That's something that I've had the opportunity to do. And I could parrot about every one of them. And he tells you, and he has told many people, you think about the way that we navigate and the way that we farm and the way that we bank and the way that we do all of these things. These things are all impacted by activities that are happening in space. And a lot of those technological developments came about because we wanted to send humans to the moon. And now you think about what we're doing now, sending humans back to the moon and onto Mars. The technology that is going to come out of that effort is going to improve the quality of life for the taxpayer, not only in the short term, but for generations to come. And so that's why NASA is always one of the best investments inside of the federal government.
I only have about 10 speeches. I just mix them up.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, I've been inviting him to these things, and it's always the same, yeah. We can get a hologram. Scott, your thoughts on why this is valuable for the taxpayer and the people of the world?
Okay, well, first, again, placing in context in terms of how much money we're talking about, which most people don't really realize. You know, one of the goals we had in the last administration, and in particular one of mine, was to try to raise the NASA budget back up to where it was roughly at the end of the Cold War, because we had a long decline after the end of the Cold War in that particular line of geopolitics. And the NASA budget back then was about almost a little under $14 billion. If you convert that into dollars today, that would be, in 2020 dollars, that would be about $25 billion, which is where we are. Inflation recently makes that a little higher. I won't bore you with the details, but basically we succeeded in getting back to roughly where we were at the end of the Cold War. Probably still need a few more billion or so to go, but and it was like 1% of the federal budget, and we're, of course, less than half of that today. So first off, from an affordability standpoint, everything that people said, it's relatively modest. In terms of what do you get for that money, okay, great, it's modest, but what do you get for it? I divide up in sort of two types as sort of Bhavya does, but I use simpler words like high touch and low touch. High touch are things like technologies and outcomes that literally touch people's lives, whether it's their GPS device, whether it's a satellite communication, whether it's new drug regimen, something that directly impacts them that came out in part because of what space did. And we are able to do those kind of innovations because we're literally going into an alien environment. You don't learn a lot staying home. You don't learn a lot looking at the same text over and over and over again. You learn by experimenting and pushing yourself into new areas where you have no experience, where you don't know what's going to happen. That's why we build massive research facilities. That's superconducting, looking at colliders, so where we look at space stations. We literally want to go where no one has gone before in order to learn from that experience. I see Mike nodding at the Star Trek reference, okay? Thank you. But the other kinds of benefits from that are what we might call the sort of a lower touch. They're harder to see. And one of those, I would say, is, of course, things like, inspiration, education, next generation and all that, being inspired by this. But I also say there is very practical kinds of reasons. And I'm in an international affairs school, and one of the things we point out is the United States has a security dilemma with regard to space. On one hand, space is like really critical, all the reasons everybody knows, the economy, security, everybody in this room knows. On the other hand, we don't own it. We don't control it. We don't have a fence around it. We don't have a flag on it, say this is ours, stay away. We have to share it with everybody. It's the province of all mankind. So how do we make sure that we protect our interests, utterly vital interests in access to space, having positive norms of behavior, as Mike mentioned earlier? Well, what you have to do is you have to convince other people to voluntarily want to be with you, to want to be part of your club. Unlike Apollo, where it's, look how cool I am, I can do something no one else can. It's, I'm doing something really cool. Do you want to be part of this? And you invite people in. And you have programs like Artemis, which have many different, if you will, price points, many different levels that people can come in on. So you can have big strategic partners like Europe, Japan, and Canada. You can have emerging space powers who can find new ways. You can have the Mexican Space Agency, which did a partnership with Astrobotic, which is going to be the first Latin American country to land a payload on the moon. You can have Korea, which used a commercial launch on SpaceX to be able to put a rover on the moon. You open up the opportunities for participation. And by doing so, you have people wanting to align with you, wanting to be work on the norms of behavior that are in your self-interest, long-term enduring interests of the United States. So we solve our security dilemmas in space by programs like Artemis. And Artemis also teaches us to learn new things that we wouldn't learn if we stayed home, which in turn benefits the lives of taxpayers every day at a really modest cost. Over.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I had a number of questions, but instead I really want to give folks in the audience a chance to ask here. I'm going to start with one, though, that was sent to me by Keith Cowing at NASA Watch. And Bhavya, this is for you. And he says, you've been talking a lot about advanced technology in your new position. Specifically, what is being done and what still needs to be done to finally apply nuclear technology to advanced propulsion systems and actually demonstrate that in space?
So, a great question. Space nuclear propulsion is a critical component of our going, not just getting humans to Mars, but also doing science in deep space. It isn't just for human exploration that we need propulsion. And just a quick reminder to folks who haven't thought about this in a while, the reason nuclear propulsion is a good idea is because it has twice what's called the specific impulse, or ISP, as chemical systems, and twice for one type of nuclear propulsion called nuclear thermal propulsion, and 5 times or more for another system called nuclear electric propulsion. And I mean, those are weird technical terms. Think of nuclear propulsion as having better gas mileage. and many have better gas mileage, you can go farther with less gas, right? So that's one advantage nuclear propulsion offers. Or one of the things that we want to do is because we have more energy, we can punch faster through space. We can take higher energy orbits and for example, cut by 30 to 40% or more the time it takes to get to Mars. And why is that important? It's important because that's less radiation exposure for our astronauts. That's fewer opportunities for something to go wrong. And again, the time of the transit time is just one aspect of nuclear propulsion. There's also other things nuclear propulsion can do. For example, we have a greater number of launch windows or better abort opportunities. All of it improves the safety of our system. But to the specific question, NASA is super interested in nuclear propulsion. Congress has been very supportive. And in the last year, the administration was as well, which we are very excited about. In December of 21, we gave awards to 3 companies to develop designs for propulsion systems. Those reports should be coming in the next month or so, and then we will take it to the next level. Suffice it to say, it's an important core capability that our Space Technology Mission Directorate will develop. We will be working with other government agencies, including the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense, to develop some of these very, very hard technologies. And again, going back to, I think, what Scott said, it is space that gives us the opportunity to develop these really hard things. Nuclear thermal propulsion, for example, requires us to have exit temperatures, nozzle exit temperatures of 26, 27, 2900 degrees Celsius. We'll be inventing new materials that can take this kind of technology, and think of all the exciting things we can do when we have new technologies that now enter our day-to-day domain. So I hope that answers the question, and I'm happy to elaborate as well.
Well, thank you. I look out at this amazing audience. I wish I could point out everybody who's here, but when I'm sitting here and I see Diane Howard, the Director of Commercial Space Policy, the National Space Council, standing, or she's sitting in the back, it's just an honor to be part of the audience. But let's get some questions from the audience. Who out there in the press or the audience has a question? Z, can you run the mic over?
Hi,
Marcia.
Marcia Smith, SpacePolicyOnline.com. I think this is directed mostly at Charlie and Jim, but anybody could answer, and it's the elephant in the room, China and Russia. You talk about all the international flavor of this, the need for it to be global, for everybody to get along. So is it better to bring them into the family at some level and hope that they change their ways, or is it better to exclude them until they meet some criteria of the behavior that the United States wants them to exhibit?
I'm going to go first because I'm the oddball out here. I strongly believe we're making a mistake by not engaging with, and Scott and I are going to have we're not going to have an argument, but we're going to disagree on this. China is an incredibly capable nation that is on a 50-year, at least a 50-year plan. Everybody talks about how much they've accelerated. They haven't accelerated. They're just on a steady plan that they put in place maybe a decade ago, and they're just marching because they can. I think we've been incredibly fortunate to see 3 administrations in a row here who have done what the Chinese do because they can. We've demonstrated that we can argue back and forth, but politically we can finally agree at what's good for the nation, what's good for the world. So I think we should engage China. I think we should find a way. Look what we're doing with Russia. So help me understand why that's good and why we have to, find some other way to convince ourselves that it's good to work with China. So I'm the odd guy out. If we try to isolate them, we'll end up doing exactly what they want, which is bringing people to them because they'll have a capability and they'll look like the nation that's trying to bring everybody in. They'll turn the tables on us. I think we bring them in rather than allowing them to bring others in.
Jim?
I'll let Charlie and Scott fight about China. But I do think when we think about the relationship with Russia, which of course I had oversight of when I was the NASA administrator, this has been a very challenging relationship, and of course, as of late, it's become even more challenging. I would tell you our nation's policy towards Russia, when you consider spaceflight, is it's schizophrenic at best. On the one hand, we're doing everything we can to damage their economy so that they can't do really big and important things. On the other hand, we've got a space program that's dependent on them. It used to be for access to the International Space Station, but now it's, of course, operations of the International Space Station. And we put ourselves in a challenge now where we've got a $100 billion investment into the International Space Station and a partner that has half of it that's telling us that by 2024 they're going to exit, which means we as a country need to start thinking about how we're going to deal with that. I will tell you, I am fairly certain that the United States of America is not going to send Russia billions of dollars to buy their half of the International Space Station. I'm also fairly certain that Russia's not going to hand it over for free. What does that mean? That means we better very quickly, and I'm talking to every member of Congress and every senator that you guys can all reach out to, they need to very quickly start funding commercial human habitation so that we have a replacement for the International Space Station. Congress, quite frankly, is at fault for any gap we have in low Earth orbit because they have been negligent in funding the replacement for the International Space Station. We all know, we've known forever that it's not going to last forever, but we haven't been doing what's necessary to prevent a gap from happening. And now that gap seems to be accelerating, and nobody is talking about it. Well, it's time to start talking about it because we've had gaps in the past. After Apollo and before Space Shuttle, we had a gap. Wasn't good for our country. When we had the Space Shuttle retire and commercial crew, we had a gap where we were spending, at the end, we were spending $100 million per seat with the Russians to take our astronauts to the International Space Station. Again, that wasn't a good policy for our country. We need policy that is actually smart when it comes to how we're going to replace the International Space Station. Now, as it relates to China, I think we need to learn the lessons of kind of how we got where we are with Russia. It was important after the collapse of the Soviet Union for us to have this relationship and this partnership. But here we are all these years later, and it's not a partnership, it's a dependency. We treat Russia as though they are a contractor. We give them cash, they give us product. That is a contractor, not a partnership. And when we move to more of a partnership, all of a sudden things don't work out so well. We need to make sure that we don't put ourselves in the same position with China that we have done with Russia. So I'll leave it at that. Probably, I think Scott Pace should weigh in on this.
Yeah, Scott, we were waiting for you.
Okay, so first of all, Charlie and I are actually probably not all that far apart. I think we should have a communication line open to China on space issues, but it's going to be what the political traffic can bear. I think things that are, as we've said in past summit meetings, some of which I think, and sessions that Charlie led, we talked about cooperation, which was reciprocal, transparent, and mutually beneficial. So I could imagine exchange of lunar samples. I can imagine exchange of biomedical data. We do have cooperation with China in certain areas, Himalayan watershed, for example. Where we don't have cooperation is things that require a high degree of trust and a political environment that's supportive of that trust. That situation is really just simply not there with China. They have capabilities that are interesting, but not so attractive that they overcome the larger political problems that we have. In the 1980s, there used to be advocates of going to Mars with the Soviets as a way of having a political breakthrough. I, as a space advocate back then, argued against it because it got things backwards. Cooperation in space comes after there's a cooperative political relationship. It doesn't come before. Space is a lagging indicator of that cooperation. And I opposed going to Mars with the Soviets because, as I put it at the time, I'm not interested in having more prison camps on Mars. This is not just about science, it's about values, human rights, democracy, all the rest. We've been able to shield the station from a lot of bad things going on with Russia over the last decade. Invasion of Georgia, invasion of Crimea, but finally, we're kind of up against it, I think, with the Ukrainian invasion. We have been cutting off money going to Russia in a wide variety of areas. Not only do we not pay them for commercial cruise seats anymore, we also cut off waivers for U.S. parts and components in commercial satellites going to Russia after the Navalny poisoning. And so that basically stopped their participation in the international commercial market, just as there were sanctions against China after Tiananmen massacre. So values are intrinsically linked in what we do. I think there are things we can do. I think we should keep a communication line open to the Russians. I think from a technical cooperation standpoint, I think the cosmonauts are tremendous. I think their engineers are very creative and do really well under tough circumstances. It's not a problem with the Russian space specialists that we deal with. It's a problem with the government, and space is not inseparable from that. Now, Charlie makes a good point, which is people need to be have a sense that they can work with us and not go to China, which might appear as the more welcoming and open entity. That's a very, very good point, and that means that we should make sure that we are offering opportunities to other countries. It doesn't mean that they may choose to go with China, but they should have a choice as to whether or not they go with China or go with us. And so Jim's point about the need for commercial LEO development and to have those platforms up and running and having multiple options is really, really critical if we're not going to leave low Earth orbit to China. So I worry less about what China does or doesn't do in space. We should have lines of communication. We should make sure we can have communications and safety and responsible operations in space. I think the first thing we should pay attention to is what we do and what our priorities are. And I think Artemis and commercial LEO development are the right priorities, and we should just simply get on with it. And the problems with China and Russia will start to resolve themselves in separate channels. Over.
Thank you. Mike, do I sense you chomping at the bit? And if I could get you to address it quickly then.
Yeah, do I look like that? Beware of false dichotomies. The question shouldn't be, do we work with China? Do we not work with China? As you just heard, the answer is both. And both Charlie and Scott are exactly correct. We need to acknowledge that China in many ways represents an existential threat to the freedoms, diversity, inclusivity, the very foundation of what makes us Americans and other countries in the free world. And as Jim talks about, and I appreciate so much him being an advocate for this, a space station gap would in many ways be even more pernicious than the transportation gap, because not only would we lose out on the science, the commercial developments that you get from having a space station, the geopolitical concept where we are right now the hub of a global community, China would then replace that. And again, this is why Artemis was so important as well, because prior to the Artemis program, there were many countries that were looking towards China as the sustainable partner, because we had failed time and time again to sustain a beyond LEO program. Failure wasn't just an option, it was a certainty. And when we began Artemis, and Jim sent me over to talk to the international partners, I remember Jim Morehard saying, Mike's been here for 2 weeks and he gets to go to Paris. I haven't gone to go to Cleveland. But when I went and I spoke to ESA for the first time, they were outright skeptical. You know what we taught the Europeans? The Lucy and the football concept. They were coming to me talking about Peanuts characters, to why should I believe anything that you would say? And that's where bipartisanship came in. I said, don't listen to me, listen to Senator Cantwell. Listen to what the people on the other side of the aisle are saying and why bipartisanship was so important. But if we lose that foothold in LEO, we also lose the transportation. That is going to have a gigantic effect on our ability to field, to learn from, and develop our launch industry. So it's absolutely critical that we don't cede that territory to the Chinese. At the same time, and as Scott just articulated, there are many areas where we can work with China. And I believe space policy among them, that there's great common ground between what China wants and what we want. And together, I think we can shape a more peaceful world, as well as the science that, again, Scott mentioned, lunar sample swap, climate change issues, which are inherently global. These are all areas that we can work together on. So it's not one or the other, it's both. And we always need to approach these issues in a nuanced manner to build a better future that we all want to see.
Right,
I'll let Charlie close this.
Topic. One thing we need to remember, NASA is more than human spaceflight. Please, NASA, the big A, aeronautics, we were on the way to an incredibly cooperative program with China. We brought them into an organization called IFAR, the International Federation of aeronautics research. We helped them get the presidency of that organization where we were working on air traffic management and those kinds of things. There are a lot of areas. We work with them now in glacial, because they're really good at glaciers, understanding that stuff. So a program of Severe, they're a partner in Severe Himalaya. I think Jim commented about the space community in Russia is great. It's the government that's not. We should take advantage of the science, aeronautics, and space community in China and try to do what we can to open up avenues there. I'm not advocating, giving up to the Chinese government. That's for somebody in D.C. or somewhere else to figure out. But I can figure out ways that we can work with them in aeronautics, science, and human spaceflight, I think.
All right.
One thing I'd like to be clear on, I prefer Cleveland to Paris.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that question, Marcia. Janaea.
Just don't want anybody to question my loyalty.
So now that does make me want to say the story. In Paris, Jim supported America by going to Five Guys for dinner.
I did.
In London, I went to McDonald's with him. But
Yes.
That seems to be a pattern. When we went to Paris, my husband only wanted to go to Starbucks and Subway.
Okay.
Are we
My
doing
kinda guy.
advertising for companies?
Janaea.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for all of your comments and your insight. My name is Janaea Griffin. I am with the Equity Space Alliance. We're a social and capital impact company that's focused on bridging the gap between resources and historically excluded communities. I'm also a current student at Thunderbird in their Space Leadership Business and Policy program. And I have a question that is on behalf of our entire Space Cohort 1. Which kind of piggybacks off of what you guys were already talking about, but taking it into maybe a little bit more depth. But since space is a global effort, and many of you on the panel have already mentioned international partners, as the Artemis program matures, what should be the plan for international collaboration and continued policy development to keep space for all of humanity? I know we've been talking about China and Russia, but there are also other spacefaring nations with up-and-coming space programs. What are you guys' thoughts on continuing that development and partnership?
Well, I think that's a Mike Gold question. And Mike, a little bird has told me that Ecuador might be the next country to sign on to the Artemis Accords.
Stay tuned. Hopefully number 22. But I really appreciate the question. It's absolutely vital. Artemis will be the broadest and most diverse human spaceflight coalition in history. And it will involve both traditional partners with large amounts of money and capability and heritage, but on the other end of the spectrum, no matter how modest your contribution is, there is a place for you in Artemis. And Greg mentions Ecuador. Well, we're of course absolutely thrilled to have countries like France and Italy, Japan, Canada be a part of the Artemis program. I get equally, if not maybe even slightly more excited when we see countries like United Arab Emirates, for example, that have done so much in such a little amount of time. Bahrain, Colombia, Scott mentioned Mexico, that it's vital that Artemis not just take the US and the traditional spacefaring nations, but the world, as much of it as we possibly can, with us, both for financial reasons. It's obviously cheaper when you share the burden, but I think more importantly, one, diversity isn't just the right thing to do, it's mission critical. Only through diverse viewpoints can we innovate, can we tackle problems more effectively. And so the very success of the Artemis programs depends on international diversity and getting countries involved that haven't looked at space before. And that's why your question, and I applaud what you're doing to get more equity, more diversity, more inclusivity into space and into the program. And, beyond that, these are the countries that in many instances can benefit most from space. If you look at the importance of enhanced telecommunications, if you look at some of the biomedical, the agribusiness that we can do, it's going to be transformative for everyone. But that is going to take an intentional effort. It's why I was so proud to serve with the Artemis Accords, and so grateful to Jim and Gabe and everyone, and then to Bhavya and everyone for continuing that. But diversity is going to be key to Artemis's success, to space exploration's success, and humanity's success.
I have to say, Zahir and I were teaching in Saudi Arabia just last week, a program for the Saudi Space Commission, and they're the latest country to sign on to Artemis. And the young people that we worked with were so proud of that, so motivated, and it was just really good, particularly to see the young women who were just saw a whole brand new future coming forward, and that was representative of it. So I think even just symbolically, it's super valuable to do that. Do we have another question out in the audience? Back there.
Thanks. Casey Dreyer from the Planetary Society. Scott and some of the other discussion about the budget growth over the last few years really got me thinking. Inflation-adjusted NASA's budget bottomed out in 2013, but since then there's been this kind of quiet growth every single year, and it's actually historically the longest period of steady growth of NASA's budget, which has crossed 3 administrations now, multiple Congresses, multiple partisan control of Congress. Did something fundamental change about how we communicate, or how you were communicating to policymakers to help drive that? What about the message started to resonate in the early 2010s that reversed 15, 20 years of steady declines?
Gabe, I think I'd kind of like to hear what you have to say about that, and then maybe to Charlie.
Yeah. So I think part of it, just answering your question directly, I think it was getting more intentional. I'll tell you, that was for us, and man, there's so much to say here, goodness. So we created what we like to refer to as the juggernaut at NASA, right? We wanted an opportunity where we were creating so much positive activity and momentum and having so many conversations about the vision of Artemis and where we are headed at NASA, that it created this momentum that was going to cross administrations, right? That was our objective, was to make sure we created a program that crossed the administration, because like Dr. Pace said earlier, we haven't been successful in that in the past. And so whenever it comes to a budget, and it comes to the people that control the budget, looking at Congress specifically, we knew that we had to get a bipartisan group of members of Congress that could see themselves inside of what it was that we were trying to do, inside of Artemis. How did it benefit them? How did it benefit their constituents? How was this going to be a win for not only the current workforce, maybe in their state or in their district, but also in the workforce to come? And so what we did is we hit the road. We built an Artemis roadshow. We went to, I don't know how many different districts and states across the country in a matter of 2 years, where we looked at every opportunity to engage academia, to engage the political interests, both local and federal, on those visits, to engage industry, and to bring people together to understand why this was so important. And then what you ended up having is you had members of Congress go back to Congress and say, I need to fund this. I need to fund STMD. I need to fund SMD. I need to fund NASA. This whole effort here that is science, technology, and human exploration working together to put Artemis front and center. Like we built champions across the country. And that all started in a small conference room at the West End in Pentagon City when we sat down and Jim said, look, I think I want a juggernaut of activity. That's going to be the only way that we get Artemis to sustain from one administration to the next, is if we build such a broad coalition of support that there's no choice but to keep going forward. And so that translates into budgets. And now I can't speak to the great work that Administrator Bolden and some of the others did previous to us, because you mentioned back to 2010. But how did we keep the momentum going? That was one of the key things for us.
It just so happens
like
we have somebody.
Okay,
go ahead.
What I would like to add is, I think Chance favors a prepared mind, and I think you had a prepared mind. But I think there is a lot of serendipity. There were a lot of things that got started that were just coming to fruition like clockwork, right? There is Perseverance landing, Ingenuity helicopter. And again, I know you're talking about 2010 and the earlier days, but just taking examples from the last couple years, just things have just come to fruition. Jim said to take credit for things that happen on our watch. So James Webb just recently in Artemis One, and this cadence will continue. So I think that is part of what I think, that's one lesson I want to take away from all this, that we need to keep a rapid clip of exciting space activities to keep that momentum. So what is next, whether it's Mars sample return or one of the Venus missions or NEO Surveyor, DART. There's so many exciting things that are coming up. We just need to make sure that, as to what Gabe said, that we stay, we keep that active momentum so we don't slow down.
And Bhavya, to build on that, it's important that we don't let these tremendous opportunities that go to waste, right? Like, I think there are so many things that are being achieved and accomplished that when we actually get out there, and this goes all the way back to Administrator Bolden's point, when we get out there and we celebrate those achievements and accomplishments in a way that people get to experience in new ways across the country and globally, man, you really create an opportunity to build momentum and to capitalize on each one of those opportunities. I loved the Perseverance launch. Whenever Dr. Z found the right guy, a younger kid in Virginia who named Perseverance, brought him in. Like, I remember sitting with him around the Perseverance launch and talking with him. And then that story just grew. And that story led to the naming of Ingenuity. And we started taking all of these opportunities and finding ways to bring people into each of them and not miss an opportunity that's out there. NASA's doing so many incredible things. We have to tell the right stories. It creates the momentum that then turns around and helps members of Congress pull the lever for NASA and sign the bills for NASA in ways that promote us to go on and do great things.
All right.
And that actually, sorry, I know you want to go on, but the international piece is really important here as well. And I think Scott mentioned that when we are connected with other countries, it's just harder to track back. For all sorts of reasons, we have to keep moving forward. So I'm just taking a lot of these lessons to make sure that momentum continues.
I would also add, Casey, it was the hard work of the Planetary Society over those years.
And let me give a shout out to the National Space Society, including Carlton Johnson, who's the head of the Board of Governors there. But Charlie, no, you got nothing to say there. Okay, I just want to thank you for your work there. And I have to say, when I was on the agency review team, one of the things we looked at, it was just what Bhavya said, that if we engage our international partners, it's going to be a lot harder for some members of Congress to say no to what we want to do continuity-wise, and I think that is such a lesson. Okay, Carlton has something to say.
Hey, Greg? Hey, Greg, could I add something?
Yes, sir. Yes, of course.
On the other side, first of all credit to Jim and Gabe and his team for really putting themselves out there and beating the bushes and getting the votes and connecting with people. It's hard retail political work that was incredibly, incredibly important. It would not have happened without Jim's leadership on it. I want to point to those of us who didn't bother leaving the campus on White House and said, how did we get OMB to go along with that? And of course, people knew that Vice President Pence was supportive of space and going this direction. So of course, we were going to put some funding into it. But sometimes that's done enthusiastically, sometimes it's done reluctantly in those kind of directions. And I have to say, a key difference, to get to Casey's point or question, is that we had a different point of view. We had a strategic direction with commercial and international partners, which you started to see, frankly, in the Obama administration, but we really put a focus on that with commercial and international direction. So there's a new strategic concept for why we were going out into space once again, and it was not Apollo. And the second thing was innovation. If the basic deal was we could see increases in the NASA top line happen, but not unless there was going to be innovation going with it. So this is why you see the human landing system as being a public-private partnership. This is why you see so much stress on new and innovative technologies, that it could not just be the old way of doing things, but innovation, new strategic direction, I think, and in response to a changed world from the 1960s is what made the difference. I'm old enough to remember a lot of other past events, Viking landing on Mars, for example, and Voyagers and so forth, that generated tremendous enthusiasm, but they didn't translate into the NASA budget. So we've had these great events, but what's different this time is we now have a direction that's clearer in mind. We have a larger coalition that's clearer in mind, and we have an emphasis on innovation as a break from the past that also is helping people come to our side in support of the program. Over.
Thank you. And as I said, I gave the Planetary Society a moment. I've got to give the National Space Society a chance here. Carlton.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for coming out today. Really appreciate what you've said. I am Carlton Johnson from the National Space Society Board of Governors, and one of the things that we've been talking about for 40 years is getting out there, settling in space, human beings habitating in space, and the things that are happening with Artemis help us to get there. One of the questions I have for you is, and with all due respect to the engineers, because I are one as well, I think as we go forward in this space, we need the dreamers, the shapers, the singers, and makers to go with us as well. And when you look at the workforce that's being developed, I think there's a gap there. And I would like to kind of get your interpretations of how are you going to leverage Artemis to create that next generation of people who not only can build the technologies, but who are going to go out there and establish the habitats whereby we will now expand humanity out and settle in space.
In the interest of time, we can only give that to one panelist. Who would you like to ask that to, Carlton?
I would like to ask that, Bhavya.
Bhavya. Sure. So one of the ways Artemis can do exactly what you are talking about is, do the storytelling, because Artemis is not just a series of one-off missions, right? We are looking at this long-term vision of long-term presence, sustained presence on a lunar surface. Artemis Base Camp, which will have, habitats. It will have pressurized and unpressurized rovers. It would have international participants, ISRU, in-space resource utilization. We intend to, extract water. We intend to make propellant. So this is the kind of exciting pushing of the frontier that will happen, beginning with the moon and then on Mars. And as long as we continue to talk about it in communicable ways where we can, connect with the audience, I think it would not be, I cannot imagine it being very hard to get that next generation excited about the future, our future, the future of humanity in space and beyond.
Thank you so much. Let's quickly get one more question in here. Is that Irene?
Yeah.
Welcome.
Irene Klotz with Aviation Week. Just to bring this back to what's on the launch pad there, NASA's done a pretty good job, I think, of talking about how this is a flight test, but in light on the topic of momentum and on the subject of partnerships, how important is it, I guess whoever wants to weigh in, that this flight goes successfully, and considering that Artemis 2 may or may not be within this administration's time frame, and certainly Artemis 3 is beyond it. Do you feel that at this point the momentum in this program will be able to sustain this effort at least over the next 10, 15 years?
It's critically important. It's always critically important to be successful, but let me caution people. This is dangerous business. It's risky business. And one of the things I love about what we're doing right now, and I think a lot of people are misconstruing it, there is no race. If the Chinese the Chinese have already landed on the backside of the moon. So what? We're still going to land on the backside of the moon because there is more work to be done. The Soviets beat us in everything we tried at first, but did we give up? No, we did not. And it's critically important for us to help people understand that we really want to continue to lead the world. And one of the things that is important in leading the world is to help people understand how you deal with failure. I go back to my kids and my grandkids, trying to help them understand you can't win every day. You can't win every day. But on the day that you don't succeed, you go back to the drawing board and you figure out what you did wrong, and then you make it right. So I would say it's critically important for us to be successful tomorrow, but we're not always going to be successful, and we can't quit when that happens. We've got a plan, and we've got to stick to that plan, and that plan includes how do we deal with failure. That's critically important, and I think that's a story we really have to tell people all the time.
Yeah. And I hope we'll see that continuity even in the future Kardashian administration.
No.
Can I add one?
Yes, sir, of course you can.
Because I'm the one that's got to get out of here.
We're all going to get out of here on time, don't worry.
I don't know how many of you know the name Jessica Watkins. Jessica is on the International Space Station now, and I am so incredibly proud of what she has done. For academics to see someone do a peer-reviewed paper, finish the peer-reviewed paper from space, okay, do their final little edits and stuff, that has never, ever, ever been done again. So I say that because I hated it when we said we're going to put the first woman and the first person of color on the moon. that puts so much pressure on whoever those people are, unnecessarily. But I would say, look at the performance of the people who are doing what we're doing. The first people to go back to the moon will be the most prepared, the most qualified, whether they're women or people of color. My belief is, how can we miss? How can we miss? You know, when a woman of color like Jessica Watkins is doing what she's doing, forget all these other people, you know, who will criticize it.
Yeah, doing a peer-reviewed paper approval in today's journals is hard enough. I can't imagine. Anyway, I wish we had more time. We don't. We're promising to get everybody out of here at 3:30. So I would like to thank our panelists so very much. It's been really incredible. And my colleague, Professor Ali, has some closing comments.
Yep. Thank you, everyone, for attending. You know, when Greg and I came together to create this degree in space business, it was, as was mentioned here, inspired by Apollo. I personally used to stay home. The only time my parents let me watch TV in the morning on a weekday was to watch a shuttle launch. And I think a lot of people, you know, have that type of experience. This is what brings us all together. And we're really proud to have hosted Administrator Bolden, Administrator Bridenstine, AA Lal, AA Gold, and Chief of Staff Sherman here. You know, there couldn't have been a more spectacular panel on the eve of the return to the moon. So please, let's thank them.
And Scott,
thank you so much. And of course at Thunderbird, you know, our heritage is you know, being founded by veterans, and we have a little tradition. So I just want to present each of the panelists with Space Cohort 1's challenge coin. And
directed by one of our students,
right.
General Feldman. Thank you, Damon.
That's right. General Feldman of the Air Force Space Force Reserves. And here we say the motto. The motto is non orate pro theritate, orate pro virtue, which is which comes from the Maori wayfinding leadership principle of don't pray for good weather, pray for courage. So I think we should pray for both for tomorrow.
Yeah, we want.
Sir, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Oh.
Thanks, sir.
And Scott, it's in the mail.
Yeah, we definitely have one for you, Professor. But we'll come bug you in D.C. for it.
All right. Well, thank you all. I hope you enjoy an amazing launch tomorrow. I am so proud of all the vendors and all the thousands and thousands of people that worked for them, Lockheed, Boeing, Jacobs, and all the subcontractors. And let us not forget Artemis is more than just what's on the pad there. We've got SpaceX. We're going to have contributions from Blue Origin and all sorts of other companies that'll all be part of this great adventure. Thank you.
Thank you all.